Greetings from the county line. Obviously, we've drifted away from the county line. We've come into Kokomo because we're taking it to the streets and looking for some major dudes who are going to tell us like it is. Found Michael Holsapple. I've known Michael for close to 40 years, I guess, maybe a little more. He's a retired college professor, academic. He's a retired police commander. He is a graduate of Johns Hopkins University. He is a very learned individual, but the thing that really makes him cool is he's been able to loop his intellectual experiences with events that happen on the ground, not only to those around him, but to him, giving him a really interesting perspective. He's truly... And the cool thing is, he's always willing to learn more. That's what I like about him. His mind's never closed. If you've got a better idea, he's always glad to listen to it. So I've asked him to just sit here on this park bench with me in Melig Park today and talk to us about some of the things that he thinks might be important in the world.
Well, you're so kind and you're so thoughtful and generous and describing our friendship, which is so dear to me. And your reference to taking it to the street, you know, I'm taking my 13-year-old son. We've divided up, Amanda, my wife and partner, and I have divided up with our two youngest children. The four of us just went to a Santana concert and Counting Crows concert, and then we're dividing up some other ones so that I'm going to take my youngest son to the Doobie Brothers concert.
Outstanding.
And speaking of taking to the street, I think that's one of their most popular songs, and I'm sure hoping that maybe by that time we've legalized marijuana in Indiana. Not for him, understand, because I vehemently oppose children and adolescents having access to that drug or any of those psychedelic type substances, because the evidence is compelling that they're destructive to the developmental process of their brains and their general health. But for adults, we're long overdue to get our heads out of our ass on marijuana.
It's interesting because I just saw something the other day, a report. I don't know. I can't remember who authored it, and it was probably biased, but the findings of this report were that states that have liberalized marijuana laws, made marijuana legal either for medicinal purposes or just personal use, are having a lot of problems with things like unemployment and homelessness and the kind of drug-related stuff that you might envision. And you know, I haven't smoked marijuana since 1973, and it wasn't really a pleasant experience for me at the time. But from what I understand about that kind of a marijuana high, it does tend to make it takes the edge off. And don't you kind of need an edge in the world if you're going to get by?
I just would push back a little bit that putting my academic hat that I lost back on for just a moment, that correlation and causation are two separate things, and I'm not sure that the correlation of marijuana with haplessness and sleeping on the street, not working, because we have a whole generation that's not willing to work. You and I grew up as a part of a generation that we still work, and you know, I'm 72 years old and I'm still working. That is not going to happen with the upcoming generations. They don't want to work. It's hard to get them to work. Mm-hmm. We got more jobs than we got people to work, and that doesn't have a damn thing to do with marijuana. Whereas there are significant forms of evidence that there could be potential benefits to the use of marijuana for medicinal reasons. And that's why I really support it. Plus I'm a libertarian when it comes to letting adults expand their own psychic and mental horizons if they want to get high on. I think marijuana generally is relatively innocuous as compared to the shit that's on the street. And frankly, you and I both were in the drug war together, and that was quite, I think, understandably, we agree, like pissing up a rope, if I can dare say that on your podcast. Anything on the street now is cut with fentanyl. And so anybody that's involved in illicit drug use, unfortunately, is just spinning the spinning wheel of death. And we're witnessing that happening in every community. And this is not a way to deal with this problem. It's just not. I think we have to, I don't know that I lean toward complete legalization of all things, for all times, for all people. Clearly, I'm not suggesting that we go completely to the other extreme, but I do think it's high time. We've been in a drug war for about 150 years. Starting with
Didn't start with Nixon then.
No. Started with the Opium Wars in China. We need to learn. Someone famous. I'm not smart enough to remember names. Someone famous said that history may not repeat itself, but it certainly rhymes. And there's a lot of rhyme to the drug problem. We just repeat ourselves over and over and over and over and over again, to the eventual destruction of so many lives in our society. So anyway, long-winded story short, I'm very much an advocate of legalization of marijuana. We recently mentioned a mutual friend of ours, Mike Karakoff, at the state legislature, and I called him. I said, Mike, I'm one of your constituents, and doggone it, get to work. I love tugging on him because he's such a great guy. He's such a genuine servant to the people. He really is. He's proven that to me in the years I've known him. I have great respect for him, admiration and friendship for him. And I said, get to work. I want you to legalize marijuana in Indiana. Now, how do you do that? You dice it up somehow, medicinally or for every recreation, however you want to do it. We're trying. We've done it. The state legislature, controlled by the Republican Party, we've done it for years. It's the governor won't sign off on it. So we're waiting for the new governor. It's probably coming anytime soon because we're surrounded. Michigan, legal. Ohio, legal. Illinois, legal. Kentucky, legal for medicinal use, and everybody's got a medical tag because you can get one. I just saw it on Groupon. Groupon, the retail shopping, online shopping network. You can buy a medical tag. Yeah, the doctor you get it from, her name is Dr. Weed. She's going to be a billionaire. I mean, what a salesperson. Dr. Weed. Dr. Weed, send me a medical certificate so I can get marijuana.
This is all part of the fake world, isn't it?
I think so. Yeah, a little bit.
Well, what's real? What's real? What can we trust?
This bench we're sitting on is still holding us up, thank goodness, because my back needs all the support I can get these days.
I'm not going to let you get away today because you express yourself without trying to provoke anybody, I think. But when the Kokomo Lantern gets around to publishing this podcast, we will have seen at least our first debate between the end of democracy and progressive wokeism, as you described it last week. Where do these MAGA people come from?
Well, my judgment, and my judgment's probably not much better than some of the hapless people you described earlier that won't look for a job and maybe are taking a nap on the street. But my sense is they're us. They're frustrated with basic concerns like cost of living. They're frustrated with people pouring over the border. That they probably had some of their fears escalated unrealistically and unfairly that everybody coming across the borders are rapists. That this, studies, statistics, the truth doesn't support or represent that as factual. Immigrants, migrants, illegals commit less crime than the rest of us. So that's sort of propaganda stuff. But they are flooding cities where the cities are incapable of accepting the volume and accepting the responsibility to house, to feed, to employ, to provide medical service and educational service for their children and so forth. And so people are frustrated with those things. And I think, in my own judgment, a significant thrust of Donald Trump's appeal is that he is a remarkable salesperson, a very clever and very gifted salesperson. And he sells the idea that he talks about it like I will be your retribution. We've all heard that repeated so many times. But what people are hearing is, I will say things that you can't, that you're no longer capable of saying, that you're no longer allowed to say, but I'll say them for you.
What?
Because we've got a woke culture.
Wait a minute. This is America, land of the free and the brave. We have a First Amendment that guarantees us the right of free speech, right?
No, we're the land of the cancel culture, and we're the land of wokeness.
Oh, yeah.
And this is where freedom of speech has gone to die, and this is the land where we've allowed ourselves to be seduced into this wrongful thinking that we shouldn't measure thoughts and expressions in the context in which they exist. So now we place them in categories, and categorically certain things can never be said, can never be uttered. This is like Orwellian. This is like the 1984 novel we were all required to read when we were youngsters in high school. And it's alarming and frightening to the common guy and the common gal in America. And I think they have flocked to the I think dangerous, please don't misunderstand me, I think dangerous siren that Donald Trump represents. I think his voice and his message poses a genuine threat to the future of our society, and I think to our democracy, as many have voiced.
Well,
but I don't think that message resonates with the majority of Americans. I just don't think it does. I don't think they're calculating democracy's at risk. I think they're calculating it's already been lost, and he might get it back. And I think that's his appeal.
Yeah. There are those, though, progressives, I suppose, who might argue that conservatives are just as guilty of canceling speech as
they are.
Progressives are. I mean, this business of prohibiting certain books from appearing on the shelves in public schools, for example, if that even goes on, I don't know. I've not seen any evidence around here. I've talked to people at our local library. They don't care what they put on the shelf.
Well, it does go on, and there is evidence that it does exist, and you're right, you're correct. It exists on both ends, though, that the right does exclude. They don't want you to read that someone might be possibly gay, because heaven help us that there might be some other sexual orientation than what we want to prescribe, being on the extreme right end of the spectrum. But the left is equally guilty. They banned Tom Sawyer. They don't want you to read a book that has a referential use of the M word, which we all know is abhorrent. We all know is destructive. We all know is a horrific reference to a person of color. But in a historical context, it makes sense to understand its use. And so those two extremes share in common an abandonment of common sense. They represent an abandonment of normal logic. And I fear that they've constricted the ability of middle America, so to speak, the centrist part of our culture to breathe. And that, again, I think that's the appeal that Donald Trump holds in a culture, because otherwise I find it exasperating and confusing, because he's really, in my judgment, and it's personal, of course, he's a deplorable person.
By any definition.
Well, by any definition that I know.
I mean, my gosh, he filed bankruptcy 4 times. He cheated on his 3rd wife while she was pregnant with
he's a con artist, deluxe.
The list goes. I mean, you wouldn't want him as a neighbor.
No, you just can't. You can't stop checking the boxes. You'll run out of boxes.
But he's got a huge following because
he's got a majority following, I fear.
And he's probably going to be.
I think he's going to be reelected
because
cancel culture has canceled too many Americans out of a position where they think this society still exists for them.
We talked earlier about the pendulum and how it swings back and forth. It swings over to the liberal side, and then it swings back more conservative. And you and I've seen it happen several times during our lifetime. And we keep hoping that it's going to eventually get centered. And also, you mentioned the plea of Rodney King some years ago. Are we ever going to reach that point?
I'm fearful. I don't want to abandon hope. I've got children and grandchildren. And as do you. And as with any parent or grandparent, you strive never to abandon hope for their sake. I am fearful. I am fearful that the extremes have gathered magnetism to the point that the pendulum has gone so far to each side. Again, that the center has just become emasculated and has lost its foothold. And there's just some. Although I'm certainly probably not the most lucid representative of that argument, there's so many arguments in favor of that position and illustrations of that in our contemporary world, of people being canceled for silly, remarkably ridiculous reasons, and that represent where something that started like, okay, that makes sense, suddenly, what? This makes no sense. Just as the so-called Me Too movement, the idea that we recognize that women can be victimized and that they should have a voice and that we should hear them and that they should be protected and represented when they're victimized. But now, all it takes is an accusation. Mm-hmm. And a mere accusation now has condemned the person accused to oblivion. And reasonably minded people, which I think our culture has thrived on reasonableness, are fed up and frustrated and fearful. And fear drives people to positions that otherwise don't make a great deal of sense, I think.
Is there really anything to be afraid of?
I'm afraid what will happen with the resurgence of a Donald Trump presidency. I truly am afraid of that.
What are your concerns?
That he will continue. He's already done a great deal of damage in our society for an individual. I really cannot, to the extent that I understand American history, and I think I do, to some reasonable extent, I can think of no other single individual that has so damaged the institutions upon which our society rests and depends for our continuation of our ideals and the pursuit of a more perfection of those ideals as our founding fathers really desired and I think intended. And so with his resurgence, as I expect will happen, I think he will unmoor each branch of government. I think he will assume a dictatorship type, authoritarian type posture.
There's already evidence. I mean, he did that in his last administration.
But
His intelligence department,
I think he's more savvy in how to accomplish those ends now, and I think he will surround himself by minions. Already has.
Voters are going to be stacking those concerns, those risks against, their daughters being in bathrooms and having to share stalls with transvestites, and the risk of their kid, being pulled out of school and taken away from them because they won't allow them to have a sex change operation. They're stacking that against the fact that thousands of people have poured across our border. Apparently, some of them with violent intent.
Well, we just apprehended recently some identifiable members of ISIS, terrorist organization that certainly is.
Missouri State Police stopped 6 people, 5 or 6, who'd abducted a young 14-year-old girl from Logansport, Indiana, and were taking her to California to put her into the sex trade.
Right. No, I genuinely think those concerns are real. I'll tell you a personal anecdote. That I think underscores and illustrates this crisis, and I really accept it as a crisis. My 14-year-old daughter has a medical crisis. We almost lost her. She had a medical crisis and required emergency surgery at Riley Hospital, and thank goodness we do have medical professionals that probably excel at what they do, and they were able to save her. But in follow-up at a local hospital, we needed to create a portal access for her to have access to her medical records and make appointments for her and so forth. So I make an effort. I'm not the most agile person on a computer, but I nonetheless intend to make some effort to do that, only to discover I'm not allowed to do that. She's 14 years old. She has to do that. She has to make her own portal. She has to make her own access to her medical records. And I call this hospital, and I find out that this is an existing federal law. And I said, well, does your existing federal law have a clause in it that says you'll send her the bill? Because that part would make more sense to me than what you're telling me.
Yeah.
That her mother and I have to go to her to say, Bodie, let's take a look at how you're doing on your medical chart. That's the madness that has consumed part of our culture. And reasonably minded Americans are fed up with such madness. And that's partial an explanation. It's not the complete explanation. I'm sure it's more complex than that. I'm sure that there are certain aggregates of people that are supporters of Donald Trump that frankly are as bad as he is, that are sexist, that are racist. I think he has corrupted a certain portion of our Christian nation, if you will. So I'm sure it's more complicated than what I'm representing, but I think in good measure, I honestly think those are the things that contribute to his existing popularity and his likely re-election.
We got like 5 minutes left, and you are enlightened. I consider you a philosopher, and every philosopher, like the subject of this song that I named this whole thing, Any Major Dude Will Tell You, is optimism. What do you find hopeful? Do you see the human spirit in America coming through all this?
History provides me some level of optimism. And because we've aged to a point that we've recognized our own experience, the sacrifices that so many people have made, people that are close to us, people within our own families, you recognize in a personal way that people come through, people rise to the occasion, people sacrifice ultimately to the point of their own lives to sustain a belief in this idea that was given birth in the foundation of this country. That's my optimism. That's where I think there is hope. As I said, I'm fearful of the damage that can be done, but I'm hopeful. There's examples of people. As you know, I'm a Democrat, I'm a liberal. How can you not respect Liz Cheney? How can you not respect Adam Kinzinger, who stood up, and journalists like Bill Kristol and others who stood up and said, no, I'm conservative, but I'm not going for this ride. Right. I believe in America, and we've got to stick together on this. And so I'm hopeful that maybe we'll come around and stick together and we'll find some unity at long last.
We've seen worse times.
Yeah, we've seen some tough times. We've lived through them. Literally, we've lived through them. We've got people now approaching times that seem very frightening and scary, but we lived through those times.
I know, I was thinking about this today because, Any Major Dude Will Tell You was written in 1973, the year of the Arab oil embargo. People today complain about $4 gasoline. We couldn't get gasoline.
Yeah.
There was months when there was no gasoline. We've seen some different times.
We lived through the times of 10 soldiers and Nixon coming. Those were realities. I was on a college campus that was occupied by police and military every single day that I was attending as a student. Every single day of my entire college presence, in opposition to a war where 58,000 Americans died.
Yeah.
So yeah, we've overcome.
I talked about this in my Memorial Day thing. I know we're pressed for time, Curtis, but just give me a few more minutes because I want to capture this. Michael, I didn't mention in this episode, but I did previously. He's an Air Force brat, and his father was a career bomber pilot, shot down in Vietnam, listed as missing in action. The family didn't know for how long?
Several days.
What had happened to him? I mean, as it turned out, friendly forces were able to rescue him almost just within hours of his crash and return him to duty. But the family did not know that. Tremendous sacrifice. But on Memorial Day, I was talking about this very thing. First of all, that families are we're as deeply indebted to the families of the military as we are the military people, because they're in it up to their eyebrows.
No question about it.
And also, gosh, I lost my train of thought. So maybe I shouldn't have interrupted and run this thing out too long. Anyway, maybe I'll remember next week. Thanks for being here.
Thank you. Been a pleasure.
And to the rest of you, Michael's going to be back for at least one more week, and if you like him, we can have him back again. God bless you. See you next week.